look back.
So can I ask a question quick before we get into this?
Yes.
Did we ever come up with a consensus on Nico, like in terms of where all of us find her in the attractiveness spectrum? Because I thought it was, it's so much a part of her thing. But if I remember correctly, you guys are both not fans of her as a sex symbol.
She's overrated, right? I'm not saying she's unattractive or anything like that, but to have the
well, I wanted to know because okay, so overrated's different than not attractive. I think Josh is in the not attractive category.
Yeah, I'm not into that like cocaine chic, like really thin look for women.
Actually, let me pull up a picture.
Or for men for that matter. But...
You don't find those men attractive either, Josh?
Yeah.
Tall, lanky guys without a lot of weight on them?
Yeah.
I know. Think about those guys. They're always so awful looking, aren't they?
You see, here's the thing.
Tall,
if you
lanky guys.
Here's the thing with Nico. You pull up pictures of her on Google, and all the pictures, like some of them she looks pretty good, and other ones she looks horrible. So
well, yeah, I think it's she can look like a smoke show, though. I have to say.
Yes, she's got the potential. I think when she looks terrible, it's almost like she's trying to do that, whether it's with the makeup or the pose or the weird. There's a weird bug-eyed one there. That's freaky, but no, she's attractive. She's definitely attractive, but not to the degree that like half of the artists that we've covered or more slept with her. Like that. Yeah. That seems a bit. That seems
pretty
a bit
much
much.
Everybody wanted to smash.
Like,
I think, including the women.
We need we need a web diagram of all the people.
Yeah, right.
Slept with her.
That'll be a good image to put on the Twitter feed.
Allegedly slept with her. Yes, we don't want to do any shaming here. Although she was very clearly outspoken about the fact that she was not the least bit concerned about anybody talking about her sex life. So I feel it's fair game for us. Anyway, Josh,
Indeed.
I apologize for hijacking the beginning of your segment.
No worries. So we went over their bio. I went over their bio in depth because this is their debut album, and we've already talked about their second and third albums, White Light, White Heat, and the self-titled Velvet Underground. We discussed those on episodes 26 and 29, and we also discussed Nico as a solo artist back on episode 13. So if you want to hear the formation of Velvet Underground and more in depth, listen to that White Light, White Heat episode. Velvet Underground, and Nico came out in March 12th, 1967. It's currently 4th on besteveralbums.com albums of the 60s and 10th overall. Unbelievable. 10th overall of all the albums released in the world ever. I disagree. So
I could tell. I could tell from how you just kept going there, but continue. Yeah.
Josh, your opinion comes later. This is your objective part, right?
Oh, right. Sorry. But we're going back in time, so that's why I gave my opinion first. So I'm going to give you the quick rundown of where we're at with the debut album. They recorded this while they were part of the Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable tour, which was his traveling avant-garde performance multimedia event. The album cover is probably most famous about this album. It's the Warhol design with the yellow banana sticker with really small print at the top that says "Peel slowly and see." I don't think I ever even noticed that before until I looked at the album recently. The original albums are now collector's items. I found that interesting. Not surprising, but I did check eBay to see original copies, and they're anywhere from like the $200 to $800 range, depending on the quality of the album.
We're gonna have to put those ads on.
Yeah,
put those ads on maybe we'll have to put ads on so that Josh can buy an original print of the Velvet Underground.
So you're saying it's more valuable than the Beatles cartoon box set DVD? Is that what you're saying?
I'm definitely saying that.
Okay.
But less valuable than an original Moog synthesizer.
Yes,
that's fair.
Purchase, yeah.
This album was inducted into the National Recording Registry by Congress in 2006, and they do a little. You can look up each of these albums on their website, the Library of Congress website, and they have a nice little essay for each one that's admitted. At Andy Warhol's insistence, Nico is the lead singer on this. 3 of the tracks on this album and backup singer on Sunday Morning. That was his idea to put her in, and I think John spoke to that when he talked about Nico. Warhol was the producer in name only and provided the cover. Lou Reed was responsible was the writer or co-writer for all the lyrics on the album, and John Cale was responsible for the sound. And then we have the other people in the band are Sterling Morrison on rhythm guitar, Maureen Mo Tucker on percussion, and Nico as well. So that's all I'm going to say. Let's get right into the review. We've listened to 2 now. What do you think going back to the beginning and listening to their debut album, Matt?
Well, this is, for me, by far their best of the 3 that we've covered. This is hitting a lot of the sweet spot of kind of the the lo-fi avant-garde with more pop sensibility. It's certainly much more palatable than White Light, White Heat, which when we talked about that, it seemed like that record was much more designed to confuse and upset listeners, or just not be musical really at all. And their third album, the other self-titled Velvet Underground album, was much more stripped down, kind of acoustic, but just a
bit more gentle, I think.
Yeah. But this is kind of, this, I could tell why this is their, highest rated record. I can tell why this is so influential. And I mean, it's crazy that this album came out, when it did. So I liked pretty much every song on this. Standouts for me were, I really liked Venus in Furs. That's where this is like a droning. I mean, there's a lot of raga rock on here. I would say like this kind of like single chord kind of dragging on, but that's got just a very cool type of sound with like this violin kind of part, kind of screeching in the background. It somehow seems to fit. The Nico songs on here, I liked, and I thought I didn't hate her voice as much as I did certainly on her solo album, and I thought that it was well placed throughout the album. They didn't do a bunch. They I think she sings lead in songs 3, 6, and 9, so it's pretty evenly spaced. So you get a Nico song, a couple other songs, and then Nico again. But I thought all of her songs were really good. Femme Fatale's a really great song. I like the background vocals in that and the chorus. Really liked All Tomorrow's Parties. That might have been my second favorite song on the record. And it's kind of just got a cool piano part, kind of like a pleasant, almost happy piano part, like juxtaposed against this like a minor key kind of like more sullen guitar and bass track in the background. So I liked that song. And I'll Be Your Mirror was just a very pretty song. Her voice still isn't great, and I think that this probably could have been better served with another female vocalist. It's almost like, she's kind of going out of key, which is not, I guess it's not terrible on this album because it fits well with the overall, sound of the album. It's almost like
she kind of fits their aesthetic.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense with what they're doing. So I didn't find it nearly as offensive as I was afraid I was going to. And I didn't know how prominent she was going to be on this, because I still didn't really know a ton of these songs going into it. So Sunday Morning's a really nice way to open the song. I'm waiting for the Man's a little bit long. It's kind of just the same thing over and over again. It's only 4.5 minutes, but it seems longer than that, just because it's all very much the same. And Heroin was an interesting song. I did listen to the lyrics of that. It was, the music doesn't really fit, I think, with the lyrical content. The music's a little more upbeat and catchy than what he's singing about. But I would much rather listen to a drug song like this that sounds like this than maybe some of the ones that were on White Light, White Heat, because that was a much darker sound. The last 2 songs, I'm not a huge fan of the Black Angels Death song. That almost sounded like a Daniel Johnston song. Like I was thinking of him when, if you heard any of his kind of, his, I don't know, like third-rate recording studio kind of just, sounds that he was making. So it was okay. And European Sun, I liked the first minute, and then the rest of it turned into Sister Ray, I think, pretty much, but a more palatable Sister Ray. So I think aside from those last 2 songs, I like this overall. It makes sense why this is so highly regarded. I'm not necessarily saying that I think that this is the 10th best album of all time, but it makes sense that it's in that ranking. I mean, this is that album that we've talked about before that not many people bought it, but everybody who did started a band. I mean, this is indie rock. This is stuff that could be coming out pretty much today, would be this, this kind of indie rock sound, which, so many other artists, were just influenced by and tried to ape. So, I'm glad we got to cover it. I never really listened to it before, knowing that it was this iconic record, but never got around to listening to it. So, I'm pretty high on this overall. I really enjoyed the listen.
Nice. All right, John, what about you? I know you've listened to this album before.
Yeah, I mean, this is the album that the Velvet Underground, the cult of the Velvet Underground, deservedly comes from, because White Light, White Heat, I think I was very clear. I found that to be an unlistenable album, pretty much. And I get what they were going for, but making a deliberately unlistenable album is not the type of art that I love, necessarily. I can understand his artistic statement, but
it doesn't endear you to them.
It's like, you have to kind of win me over before you do that. And I thought the other Velvet Underground self-titled album, the third one, was fine, but it was a little generic, which is so funny because of how non-generic this album is. A lot of what Matt said, I would agree with. I think that this is the template for what would be like all the way up to like modern indie rock in many ways. I do think the Velvet Underground are a much better band under 5 minutes than they are over 5 minutes. Yeah. I would say that this album, the songs that stay under 5 minutes, I basically love all of them. The songs that go over 5 minutes, I'm very hit and miss on those. I do like Venus and Furs, which comes in at 5:12, but Heroin and European Sun, I could do without that version of the Velvet. It's playing that same note, but over and over again. It gets long after a while. But the one thing that I found about this album is the tracks that I liked stuck in my head, which never in a million years would I think that like Sunday Morning was running through my brain for a good part of the week. I don't know what it is about the voice, but there's something I noticed in that song, as well as There She Goes Again, as well as just that they build to these choruses that are not your traditional choruses, but for some reason they transition in a way that is very pretty and also gets stuck in my head.
Catchy. It's catchy.
It's just the way it's sung. Like in There She Goes Again, there she dun, 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 dun. The progression of chords, it like gets stuck in your head, like there she goes, and then it lo-fi's down at the end of it after that. And Sunday Morning, the same thing, like Sunday morning, and then the transition, dun, 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 dun. I don't know what it is, but the lo-fi nature of it really sticks it in my head. And I think you almost have. There's a reason I picked Sunday Morning, because I picked the exact transition that I'm talking about when you listen on the montage. But yeah, Femme Fatale, the Nico songs worked for me on this album. I still can't help but think that I would love somebody with sort of the general aesthetic feel of Nico, but with a little bit better voice. I kept trying to think to myself, like, who would sing the Nico songs? And I remember having this talk back in that episode, like who would do a better Nico than Nico? And I started thinking, okay, in that era, would Marianne Faithfull be better? But not really, because she has the same sort of deal going for her, And the only people I could come up with is I'd love to hear a song like Femme Fatale in the hands of PJ Harvey and I'll Be Your Mirror. Who I thought would have done an incredible job on that? Would it be Dusty Springfield? Would have sang that song. It's because, as Matt said, it's a beautiful song. And All Tomorrow's Parties, lyrically, is a great song. I mean, there's a lot of songs on this album that are really strong lyrically, in a way that, the Velvets write interesting songs, but, in the other ones, they, White Light, White Heat, they were clearly going for almost like a grotesque element in what they were writing about. That is not really the case here. But yeah, I really like this album. Quite a bit, and if they had just released this album and sort of disappeared from the public consciousness, I think that we'd be looking at this as, and it is an influential album, but
they'd be even more of a cult band.
They'd be even more of a cult band, exactly. Yeah. And but I could, after this album, you can see why so many people were inspired to write music, and this is the one that kind of lets you in on what you need to know about them. And I don't know if it was Andy Warhol kind of guiding them toward the zeitgeist, or not. I know they don't believe that, but I can't help but notice that this one seems to capture the moment a lot better than the other two do.
Yeah, I agree. I'm in sync with you guys. I feel like this is their best album. It's like the perfect confluence of everything that is good about them, and you can see why it's special, or why Velvet Underground's special after listening to this album. I also agree that was the standout for me, that Nico is like perfectly used in this album. On this album, her voice works with what Cale and Lou Reed are going for with their music and lyrics, and just the you can see, this is 1967. Nobody else's that we've listened to that I can think of is talking about drugs and prostitution and like the dark side of New York City, essentially. Masochism, I think, is in there too with Venus and Furs, and just like sexual deviancy. I mean, you got a song called Heroin, for crying out loud, so you know what you're getting into, and that was very noticeable this listen around. I had heard this album many times before. I think I like this album the best, as I said. I like their combination of kind of sweet melodies at times with the manic feel of other songs. I feel like their songs match the intensity of like the drug use or whatever crazy shit's going on. It builds up on the songs, and they get energized. Like Run Run Run, we haven't talked about that song, but it's kind of like this piano, almost like bluesy like thing, and it's like constantly like banging the piano and stuff, and it's another song about drugs. And then I think I like the first side, the side A, more the front half of the album more than the back half. I think it kind of tails off toward the ends. I don't really have any strong feelings about the last couple of songs. European song is mostly instrumental anyway, but I think it's a really strong opening with Sunday Morning, and then they're all like really good hit after hit through All Tomorrow's Parties, and I like Heroin, and There She Goes Again. So I mean, those 7 songs are pretty top notch and a great representation of this band. I really enjoyed listening to it this time around.
I also I really like the production. I like lo-fi in general, yes. But I also like it when they're not necessarily going, the lo-fi, the fuzzed out kind of, distorted sound, but just when they have a clear, crisp guitar sound. It's electric, and it's very much the guitar sound that you hear in the third album that they do. It's just a very smooth, very pleasant sound, and it also seems unique to them, like at this time that's kind of what they're, we're going for in some of the songs. But, you've got songs like that, like something like I'll Be Your Mirror or Sunday Morning, which is that more lower, kind of slower paced song that's kind of just, stripped down. And then you've got like the, fuzzed out stuff like Venus and Furs or Run, 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 where they're kind of, they're blowing it out. It's really well mixed in that regard of how like from one song to the next. And I really did like that too.
And it's so influential, especially on a lot of 80s bands that I like Jesus and Mary Chain and My Bloody Valentine and Sonic Youth. I mean, they were all taking that sort of lo-fi approach, and if you listen to album, and we will when we get to the 80s, because they're all the bands that were influenced that by this sound and production are going to be all over the 80s. But it just, as I was listening to it, I was like, gosh, it's like you want to talk about drawing a direct line to like noise rock of the 80s / lo-fi that came later. I another thing I didn't mention for Sunday Morning, I love like that lullaby part that starts the song, kind of like a music box type sound. I think it does a really good job of kicking off the album. I really enjoyed that. I agree with you, Matt. The production on this really works, and like it doesn't in any way resemble anything else from 1967, having spent plenty of time there during our odyssey through the 60s.
No, I mean, if anything, that's when Sgt. Pepper came out, and that's where it was like, hey, let's go like this overly produced psychedelic, lush, let's experiment in the studio and do all this crazy stuff. Mellotron, like this is where stuff like King Crimson and Moody Blues, prog rock starting, and and here you just got guys in the garage like with a, I don't know, maybe a 4-track or something. It's just very like it probably wasn't how long did it take to record this? Let me see.
Yeah, I have to look that up.
April through May, like a month. And they went back in the studio in November. So, but
it's also way more influential on 80s rock than 70s, because there's not a lot of 70s rock that, unless you kind of draw like, new wave or punk and stuff, and even that's a different feel altogether than what this is. There isn't a lot of maybe Iggy Pop's solo albums share a little bit in common with this. I'm thinking like, The Idiot.
Do you think it kind of like went underground for a while and then was rediscovered because there's no like, other than word of mouth, how else would people know about?
Yeah, I think it kind of like happened at its own time and kind of got lost for a little bit, because I think people were enraptured by the sounds, understandably, just as influential, that came out of the 60s. But you had, the Beatles influencing, rock in one way, the Stones influenced it in another, Led Zeppelin brought in a certain sound. And I think that a lot, funk and just a lot of stuff came in, right? And I think it just took the landscape, and the people that were influenced by the Velvets, that stuff came in the 80s.
David Bowie had to be influenced by this to some extent.
Bowie,
right?
I mentioned Iggy Pop, and he did Iggy Pop's albums, but this doesn't sound like early 70s Bowie. This sounds more like mid 70s, like low David Bowie, right? Like not Ziggy Stardust David Bowie. And that's kind of why I housed it. The only thing I can really think of, like I said, is the Iggy Pop albums in the mid 70s that were produced by David Bowie. So there you go, Matt. But it really, the 80s is when you start to see the Velvet Underground influenced groups really come out of the so much of what would become indie rock was influenced by the Velvet sound. And I mean, you could just rattle off bands I mentioned before. I haven't even mentioned, like, Morrissey was clearly influenced by the Velvets, and in turn the Smiths, Susie and the Banshees. Like, you can keep going on. I won't like just list off a bunch of bands just because, but that's the forerunner to those bands, and I have a real soft spot in my heart for all those bands. So it was cool to kind of see what birthed them to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, depending on what Lou Reed and John Cale were doing after the band broke up in the early 70s, they were probably making music in the 70s as well.
Joy Division and New Order. There you go. That's, I guess, late 70s, early 80s, depending on when you decide to do it. That's another, way that this went, because you can see elements of Joy Division and Depeche Mode where they came from.
But even so, that's like it's not like you're talking 1970. You're talking
that's what I'm saying.
Years and years later. So it kind of just sat there. People needed to marinate on this for a little bit, I guess.
Yep.
When I remember we talked about one album and I said it doesn't have any fathers or sons, right? This has sons, but the sons came later, late in life sons.
Mm-hmm.
So
Nice. So I guess it turned out to be a good way to wrap up our. Well, are we talking about them in the 70s?
They have one in the 70s.
They have a 70s album. And we have Lou Reed a couple times too. So,
well, a good way to wrap up 60s Velvet Underground.
Yeah. Cool. All right, man.